Hello YouTubers, today I'll be covering ThruNite's first ever headlamp. This is their TH10. It arrived in this rather compact cardboard box, and this is the neutral white version that they sent for review. Within there is a spare rubber headlamp holder. It was also supplied with 2 spare O-rings and a spare translucent switch cover, as well as the manual. I've recreated the specs table so you could take a look at that yourself, but basically it has 3 standard modes that are not hidden. That is your low, medium, and high. And then there's a Firefly mode as well as a hidden turbo and SOS mode. While the UI is identical to their most recent lights like the TN36, I should say they're electronic switch lights. The only difference is that in lieu of the strobe, there's a SOS now, which I think makes a lot of sense in a headlamp. So here are some quick facts about this headlamp. It does feature a Cree XM-L2 LED. Again, this is the neutral white version that was supplied for review. It's an 1865 sized headlamp, but because of the working voltage of 2.7 to 12 volts, it can run off of 2 CR123 cells or 2 16350s or even 2 18350s. So the types of battery that it can use is pretty versatile. There is an AR coated lens up front, as you can see there, and a orange peel reflector lies behind that. It does come with 2 straps, one that goes around the circumference of your head here, and one that rests on the top of your head to support the overall weight. Now, when new, this strap is actually fairly tight. I don't have a particularly big head, but I do feel like it is a little bit tight. However, though, they do loosen up very quickly over time. This is just based on experience from other headlamps that employ similar elastic bands. Especially after you give it like a wash or two, they'll loosen right up. So if it's a little tight for you, maybe you might just want to give it one quick wash or two and just stretch it out a little, and trust me, they'll just expand quickly over time. I've never been fond of this extra top layer. I've always just preferred this, but given the weight of this particular headlamp, I do feel it is a necessity. The rubber here, given that it's new, it does offer enough tack so that if you swivel it, it will stay in place and hold there, but over time, I'd imagine that that would loosen up. But if it ever does get so bad, you could swap out the rubber with the spare that they've supplied. Now, just for the sake of handling, I'm actually going to remove this for the rest of this review. With the band removed, it's really not much bigger than, say, a small 18650 size light, with the exception, of course, that the head is right here in the middle. But then again, you could kind of use it like, I don't know, a makeshift flashlight in this manner, with your thumb being able to operate it in this manner. This bezel does look to be removable, though I'm not sure if it's glued down or not. Maybe I'll check later with a rubber wrench strap, but it's not a one piece here. There is that gap there, so I assume it's removable. On the top of the headlamp, you do have the electronic switch, and those are the grooves that you could insert a needle nose or snap ring plier to remove and replace that with the translucent switch. This switch, while seemingly identical to those other electronic switches on their most recent lights, it does not feature a LED in the middle, so it will not turn on to indicate that the light is on, nor does it have a low battery voltage warning. And just for quick reference, in case you've never seen their other lights, this is what I was alluding to about the LED indicator there. And it does sit a little higher than the other switches. And because of the lack of a lockout feature, I would suggest locking out the light by giving a quick twist so that you don't easily activate it, because I do feel that given it is raised, it is fairly easy to activate it. Just aft of the bezel are these 4 heatsink fins on either side of the light that aids with cooling. And at either end of the T-shape are grooves, although on the left hand side, I suppose this is really more to aid with the aiming of it when it's on your head. But the right side is actually the battery cap where you insert the batteries. And you could likely just make it out that at the end of the tube there is a spring, so there's a spring on both ends to help with rebound, although to be honest with you, it's not like you're going to get this gun mounted. And even if you were a headbanger, your head would rotate this way, not that way. And that's pretty much it. That covers the features of this light. So as you can see here, I've built quite a repertoire of headlamps over the years, and for whatever reason it is, with the exception of the zebra light that I no longer have, sadly, I don't know where it went. That was one of my favorites because it had no hotspot. It was a giant wall of flood, but the beam color was just horribly off. It was terribly cool. And the reason why I have so many is because I do a lot of handiwork around the house. I do most of my own repairs, electrical, plumbing, etc., etc. And that's why I always like to have a headlamp around. But not just for that, I do also like enjoy camping, as you know. So anyone who's ever gone camping can tell you any one of these will do, okay? From the weakest one, which would be probably like this one here, my daughter's headlamp. It's a Princeton Tech robot or bot. And literally it's just, you know, two of those little 5mm LEDs. But even that is good enough when you have dark adaptive vision out in the wilds, at least at a campsite, okay? I want to be clear about that because there's obviously different use cases. So general use around your campsite, getting in and out of the tent, walking around the woods, fantastic. Any one of these will do. One thing is that I would go out to the beach and it's just a vast openness of just pitch black darkness. In that case, I would definitely feel a lot more comfortable with something much more powerful. Now, until I got the TH10, this eGear X Flare Pro was actually the brightest headlamp I had. I think they tout 350 lumens. I've actually never got a chance to really measure it, meaning officially calibrate. I think in informal testing, it was close to about 250-ish to 300, but this featured a trio of Rebel LEDs, and it's an older model. Unfortunately, the cells are now depleted. I will cover a future video on how to repair that, you know, build your own battery pack. These are runs on AA's. The majority of these all run on AA's, with the exception, again, these two eGears, they run on AA's. The Petzl Pixa 3 also runs on AA's, but the rest of these all run on, well, sorry, the IRIX runs on a single AA, but the rest of these all run pretty much on AA's. The LED lenser, this is a fantastic headlamp. I believe it runs on a Cree XQE or XRE, I can't really remember, but it has a flood to throw adjuster, just as with the eGear FC100, the eGear FC200, and the eGear X Flare Pro. And the way that the Pixa does it is that it has two separate emitters, and both of them utilizes lenses. One lens is designed for throw and the other is designed more for a floody beam pattern. So this was great because, you know, I had a very nice high output, but the only problem is that you got these three AA's hanging off the back of your head. Not exactly the most comfortable, but in terms of the output and the battery capacity, it was fantastic. Next up would obviously be the FC200, and then the rest of these are all relatively comparable. This one just feels, you know, nice and chunky hanging off the front of your head because it doesn't actually have a upper strap as well. But again, getting back to the overall size, none of these are really new by now, but at least it gives you a good idea in comparison of the majority of the headlamp styles that are out there. As covered earlier, the TH10 does have 3 fixed output levels. Those are low, medium, and high, and it does have memory mode, so turn on to the last default mode used. So one quick press turns on the light, and I last used it in low, so there you go, you see it's there. The color here is fairly accurate. Actually, let me cut this light. And again, this is a neutral white version, but it's a very nice neutral white, at least in my opinion. It's not like the certain like warmer lights. I don't know the exact color temperature, but I'll try to get that for you guys. But right now, what you're seeing is low mode. Then you press and hold to cycle to medium, high, and then back to low. As you can see there. Now to access the firefly mode, it's just like the other lights. You would press and hold until it engages. And there you can probably see that. This is firefly mode. Shining here on the cardboard, you probably have to look really hard because it's a very nice dim mode. And then last but not least, from off or on, 2 quick presses will access turbo mode. Now one thing is that I did read on the forums that certain people were having problems with this headlamp in that there just wasn't a huge significant difference between the high and the turbo mode, and I can confirm that my sample is afflicted by that same situation as well. So case in point, this is on low, I'm going to pump it up to high. That's high. 2 quick presses will engage turbo. Now at first when I read that I was like, okay, maybe it could be that fact that your high was supposed to be around 490 and your turbo was 750. Visually, that wasn't too big of a difference, right? So thereby, perceptually, your eyes wouldn't really be able to quite make that out. But I did measure this on my PVC LMD and can confirm high is around like 480-ish. Again, that's non-calibrated, but it's in that neighborhood. But yet, turbo mode would only be about 560, so it really wasn't that big of a difference at all. And here's a side-by-side comparison. I'm keeping my finger there to make sure that the light stays even-keeled. But the left side is turbo, and the right side is in high mode. I'll cover the issue further in the fit and finish or the conclusion section, but for now, let me just cover off the last mode, the hidden mode, which is a SOS mode. So from any of the modes, if you double press to go into turbo, then double press again to engage the SOS. So here's the runtime plot for the TH10 on a single 18650 size battery. That's the ThruNite 3400 milliamp hour battery. Starting voltage was at 4.2 volts, and by the end of run, it drained it down to 2.95 volts. I'm not really sure what caused this little weird dip here at the beginning of the run, but it's a strange one. It's reminiscent almost, if I remember correctly, of the Spark SP6, which actually started off lower and gradually climbed higher and then started draining down. So it's a very weird run. It's not common that you see something that boosts initially and then drains down like that. It's typically you start off high and it just drains down. So certainly not typical for a ThruNite circuit board that I've seen, at least. The max lumens captured was 635 lumens. This is a bit short than the 750 lumens they claim. And this value, if I'm not mistaken, was actually supposed to be for the neutral white, because the cool white, if I'm not mistaken, was actually higher at 850 lumens. Again, my unit, I believe, was affected by that lower turbo output. So I have a feeling that that may have contributed to this. I'm not 100% sure, but it's some feedback I'm going to give back to ThruNite. Now, over the entire run, it does not run regulated at all, as you can see here, other than, like I said, this weird boost. The average for the entire run from start to when it drops below 10% of the initial measured output at 30 seconds is 387 lumens. Now, temperature didn't really get meaningfully hot. I think the max was 104 degrees Fahrenheit and, pretty much tailed off after the light dropped a little bit more steeply. And the total runtime that was achieved on the 3400 milliamp hour battery was 168 minutes. So this is actually almost 3 hours versus the 2 hours that they claimed. Again, they did not specify the battery used, so I'm not sure, but at the time, the 3400 milliamp hour battery was released when this headlight was put out. I don't have any other high output headlamps to compare to, but I would say that, again, during camping, unless, like I said, you're really using it for like a search and rescue capacity, this should more than be sufficient to meet the majority of your outdoor needs. As for its neutral tint, overall I would say it has a greenish hue to it as opposed to the creamy neutral white of this Prometheus Alpha Series XM18B. This one, actually, I can't recall the specific tint or the NC white grade, but to me, I feel like this just simulates sunlight a lot better than, say, the neutral version of this, and even more so than their headlamp, which has just a ever so slightly more greenish hue than their TN12. I do have this locked on fixed exposure as well as sunny white balance, so this comes fairly close to what I'm seeing in real life, if perhaps just a teensy bit cooler. So as usual, to conduct the beam measurement test, I use a XENO G10 V2 because that runs perfectly flat regulated, and it should be about 468 after 30 seconds. All right, so we're right about there. The exposure is on a Nikon D750 fixed 1/60th of a second f2.8 on direct sunlight with a flat profile. This is Manker's U11 on the constant current turbo mode, and they quoted 16,000 candela, so it should be about 1,000 lux at 4 meters. This is ThruNite's TH10 in neutral white. They didn't provide any peak beam intensity figures, but they did quote 148 meter beam distance, which translates to 5476 candela at 4 meters, which should be about 342 lux. Here's Manker's Timeback Copper. They also didn't provide the peak beam intensity, but they quoted 140 meters, which should translate to 4,900 candela and 306 lux at 4 meters. So as a summary, I've actually had this headlamp for a while now. It's just I ran into some personal issues and haven't really been able to get to my reviews for a few months now, but I have used this throughout the winter months outside while shoveling the snow, and it's performed flawlessly. The button is very easy to activate even with gloves on, and overall, the length isn't too bad, although I did notice, because I did have this at a downward angle on my head, I did catch the edge of the headlamp here from my peripheral vision. I don't know if they could have made this any more shorter, unless they went with kind of like the H design, like the zebra lights, but overall, as mentioned, it performed flawlessly. This does have a overall floatier beam profile, so I do like that in headlamps in general. I'm not really doing search and rescue, so I don't really care for a lot of throw in a headlamp. If I really need a throw, I would just use like the TN31 or something like that. I don't need a headlamp for that. But in consideration of headlamp uses, outdoors, like I said, performed flawlessly. The neutral tint, although bordering a little bit greenish, was still pretty good. Indoor-wise, I felt like the levels were spaced pretty well apart. Right now, the tint is a little bit bluish because of the fluorescent light here that I'm matched to. So the low was pretty good, and the medium level is fine for general duties around the house, especially like at arm's length, whatever you may be working on. As mentioned, I do a lot of electrical, plumbing, etc., handiwork around the house, so pretty much anything at hand's length distance works pretty well. Although the hotspot on a bright level like this can be a little bit, I guess, glaring, depending again on what you're working on and reflectivity of the object that you're working with. But overall, like I said, pretty nice, especially in consideration that the beam profile is reasonably wide. The fit and finish, there's nothing really to pick about. The only interesting thing, though, is that this is not hewn from one solid piece, right? So it's almost like two pieces together. You got this central piece attached here, then you got this middle tube running through there. But the thing is that you could actually see a gap between the metal here and the metal there. It's an interesting configuration, but given that they have touted waterproof, I'd imagine that there should be no concerns about that gap there. The anodization is absolutely flawless. There's no issue with it. The electronic switch provides a nice tactile feedback, although perhaps a little mushier than what I'm accustomed to on their lights, but nothing too bad. The texture on the edge here provides outstanding grip, so it makes it very easy to either adjust the light on this side or to unscrew the battery cover on this side. Now, getting to that issue where the difference between the high and the turbo isn't that great, as was covered on the forums, some users have encountered that issue. I believe they have since resolved the issue, but the only problem then is that you don't really know if the current batch that is out there is afflicted by the issue. So if you're considering the purchase of this, best thing to do is ask the retailer or ThruNite directly to say if they could double check your headlamp before sending it out to make sure that there is a distinct jump between high and turbo. I do have a link to the particular thread on CPF, so please hit up the description for that. Another thing that I would like them to focus on is being a little bit more selective with the tint. If you're going to consider a neutral, a lot of us are very particular about the CRI, which ThruNite actually doesn't even cover, but I can tell you this much again, this is not a pure neutral, nor is it a creamy white like the Prometheus. I know in the video it doesn't really show it, but in real life though, as mentioned, this has a slightly greenish tint to it, whereas the Prometheus is just a very nice creamy color. So that's one thing I would like to see them focus on, and I'm going to provide this feedback to them. But all in all, for a first attempt at a headlamp, pretty good. Would also be interested in seeing other form factors, like perhaps like a AA, and maybe even a CR123, although the problem with the CR123 is, again, not great energy density. So overall, not a bad job, with the exception of that issue, which hopefully is resolved now. And as mentioned, if you're considering the purchase of this headlamp, just again, double check with your retailer or ThruNite to make sure that they double check your unit before shipping it out, that it does not have that issue between high and turbo. As part of FTC disclosures, the TH10 was provided by ThruNite for review. Thanks again for watching.